Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the American Revolution and why independence made sense. Right? So, I first want to start by clearing off one of the most common myths about the American Revolution, and that is that the American Revolution is about taxes. Right? So, the American Revolution is not about taxes. The American Revolution is about representation, right? The American colonies' rejection to impose legislation without having proper representation in Parliament, all right? So first off, I want to go back to the idea of why independence, right? If you remember from our previous lectures, we have talked about the British colonies enjoying a certain level of autonomy, having self-government, having a lot of benefits as opposed to other colonies from other empires around the world, right? So why independence? And the answer is impose legislation, right? So the colonies in America were used to a certain level of autonomy, a certain level of self-government. So when the French and Indian War ended and Britain was in a lot of debt because of it, and they started passing legislation, the American colonies began feeling more and more uncomfortable about it, right? So the best way to explain this is that the Americans are not complaining for taxes per se. They're complaining about the lack of representation in Parliament, right? So Americans are already paying taxes to local governance, right? So they're not foreign to the idea of taxes. What they are foreign is to the idea of legislation without a proper representation in Parliament. Okay, so the very famous slogan, the "No taxation without representation," that is why it embodies so much about the American independence, right? Because the slogan doesn't say no taxation, right? Because the issue in itself is not the taxes, is more than anything the lack of representation. Okay, so one of the significant things that you see in the American Revolution is that the British keep on, repealing taxes. But the way I like to think about it is that the British are treating the symptoms rather than the disease, right? The disease was the lack of representation, not the taxes themselves, right? So when they repealed the Stamp Act, when they repealed part of the Townshend Act, what they're doing is not really, tackling the problem from its inception, right? The lack of representation. For them, giving representation to the American colonies made no sense, right? Because they don't see them as equal to them, which is going to be one of the major issues that we're going to see in the American Revolution. That the American colonies feel that they are equal citizens than the British people, right? Than people in London, for example, right? So this is a very big discrepancy, right? Americans feel like they're loyal citizens, that they feel like British, they consume British products, they read English newspapers, they feel loyal to the king, and so they feel equally to the people in England. However, the people in England do not see the colonies as equal, right? They tend to refer to them as colonials in a kind of like despective manner, right? So this is going to be a big discrepancy, and it's never going to be fully solved, right? They're never going to see eye to eye on this. And this is one of the reasons why the English never give full representation to the Americans, right? Because they don't feel like they're equal to them, right? They consider them as colonies, right? So this discrepancy is going to be one of the major, driving forces behind the American Revolution, right? And one of the reasons why they never get the proper representation. I think another of the big tellings of how this discrepancies between Americans and English are, you can see it when King George has this reply to the Declaration of Independence. It's not an official reply, but it's more of a reply from the throne in which he basically rejects this idea of all men are created equal. He rejects this idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And he just basically says that this doesn't make any sense, right? For him, he's like, I'm the king and you're my subjects. My role is to protect you. Your role is to serve me, right? So that is another big discrepancy you see between Americans and English that by the time of the Declaration of Independence, this was, the revolution was already unavoidable. And so one of the questions that I'd like to ask students is, was the revolution avoidable, right? Was there anything that could have happened to avoid the American Revolution? And I think before the Boston Tea Party, there was a way to avoid the American Revolution, but it revolved around the idea of representation in Parliament. What the British are doing is repealing the taxes. Once again, this is what I mean by treating the symptoms rather than the disease. They believe that by lowering duties on tea or by that, repealing the taxes, that the American colonists are going to be happy. But this is not the complaint. The complaint is not taxes. All right. So to go back to the question, before the Boston Tea Party, I think the American Revolution was avoidable by granting representation. After the Boston Tea Party, this was probably almost an impossibility. There was no way either the Americans or the British were going to go to the bargaining table to make a sort of arrangement, right? Some sort of compromise, right? So for the most part, I think this issue of the American Revolution shows how, not understanding the real reasons behind the discontent can lead to this major problem. Like in this case, is going to be the total and complete separation to the British in the American Revolution. Right? I hope that helps, guys. See y'all later. Be safe.